I'm Andrew Ross Sorkin, and welcome back to the New York Times' DealBook DC Policy Project. I'm thrilled to be here right now with the New York Attorney General, Letitia James, to have a conversation about policy and about law and about where we are in this country and where we are going forward. I should tell you, we're thrilled to have her here in large part because she is a trailblazer. She became the first woman in New York to be elected Attorney General. She's the first Black woman to be elected statewide office and the first Black person to serve as Attorney General in this state. And she has been very, very busy in so many ways. You have probably read the headlines. You know this. She sued Amazon recently. She's involved in a case against the Trumps, as you know, the NRA, the NYPD, Facebook. The list goes on. And we're going to explore how she's thinking about all of this afternoon. Please join me in welcoming her to this conversation. Thank you for being here.
Andrew, and hello to your followers.
And I should mention to all of to everybody who's watching, if you do have questions, you can follow along with us. You can ask those questions in the comments and also on Twitter, hashtag DealBookDC. There's so much to talk about, and I do want to get your sense of how you're thinking about the world and how you're thinking about the law and how you think about your role. But I would be remiss if I didn't ask you about the news that just literally came across this morning, hours ago. As you know, the Supreme Court rejected the bid by President Trump that would have shielded his tax returns from Manhattan DA Cyrus Vance. And I just wanted to get your reaction when you heard that news.
So, as you know, we are engaging in a separate investigation from District Attorney Cy Vance. Our investigation is civil in nature. His is criminal. We are reviewing tax information from the Trump Organization, and we are still conducting our investigation. And so until such time as we complete the investigation, it continues to be ongoing.
Does this, though, change the dynamic in any way?
It doesn't change the tenor of our lawsuit. As you know, in our investigation, what we are looking at is the fact that the Trump Organization, based on the testimony of Michael Cohen, who was the attorney for the Trump Organization and for Donald Trump individually, they inflated their taxes for the purposes of gaining benefits from insurance companies as well as from mortgage companies, and then deflated their very same assets for the purposes of evading tax liability in New York State. And so we are investigating that matter. That investigation was initiated again in the aftermath of the testimony of Michael Cohen before Congress. We did it while Donald Trump was the president of the United States, and it continues. And the fact that he is now a private citizen is really of no moment. We will continue our investigation, and upon completion, we will announce.
But does this decision in any way help you insofar as, does it make an argument for you to get access to those tax records in ways that you might not have before?
So right now, again, though, that case that was for the United States Supreme Court is a matter, again, involving the District Attorney of New York County. It does not involve the Office of the New York State Attorney General. We have obtained information on our own. There is a wall of separation between the two offices. Again, one is criminal, one is civil. And at this point in time, until we uncover some unlawful behavior or conduct, our investigation will continue as a civil matter.
Right. One of the things that you did, though, that was fascinating to me, which was you pushed a bill through that gave a carve-out, an exception to the double jeopardy protection in the event of a presidential pardon in the state of New York. You had a theory, I think, before the end of this year that the president was going to effectively step down and have Vice President Pence pardon him. That didn't happen. What was your theory behind that bill?
So the bill was not specifically aimed at Donald Trump and or his family and or any of his associates. We needed to close a pardon loophole in the law. That's exactly what we did. It applies to the President of the United States, the former President of the United States, and any president thereafter. But it was important that we correct the law in the state of New York, and so that the message is clear that no one is above the law, and that if in fact you are pardoned for federal offenses, that you will not that will not apply to offenses committed in the great state of New York.
Were you surprised he didn't step down and have Vice President Pence pardon him?
I'm never surprised by the conduct of the former president of the United States. And there has been some rumblings as to the possibility of some secret pardons. I do not know. I know that the law, again, had to be corrected. We had to fix the pardon loophole. We did just that. We did that. I want to thank the state legislature for working with my office and for the governor of the state of New York for signing it into law.
You did mention the idea of a secret pardon. Do you think he secretly pardoned himself?
I really don't know. We will see. Again, there's in the event that there is any action taken by District Attorney Vance or the District Attorney in Fulton County in Georgia, or if again our investigation, if it changes, if we go from civil to criminal, there'll be a determination at that point in time as to whether or not there in fact is a secret pardon. But there's been a lot of speculation, but it's nothing more than that, pure speculation.
Okay. Let me ask you about one other item in the news, and then I want to talk a little bit more broadly about the way you're thinking right now. But last month, you brought an inquiry into nursing home deaths in this state, in the state of New York, and you exposed how the state had drastically underreported the numbers. And this has, opened a lot of questions about the leadership of the Governor Andrew Cuomo. He, as you know, endorsed you for the role of AG. What does that inquiry look like now, and what's your relationship like with him as a result of all this?
So the report speaks for itself. And the report speaks to a number of recommendations. And I know that the legislature, in fact, is proposing reforms in that area. But what we concluded was, in fact, that the number of deaths were underreported. It was based on different categories. In addition to that, we believe that nursing homes need to engage in some reforms to protect the vulnerable populations. That there was inadequate PPE in place, that a significant number of nursing homes all throughout the state of New York had inadequate staffing, and nursing homes with a low rating, unfortunately, there was a significant number of deaths in those homes. And so it's important that we protect vulnerable populations. It's important that we, again, provide trust and provide accurate numbers to New Yorkers in the state of New York. And I urge everyone to read my report and come to their own conclusion.
Have you spoken to the governor about it?
I've spoken to the governor.
And what did he say?
Those conversations with the governor are private.
Fair enough. We will. I can try, but I appreciate you taking the question to begin with. Let's talk more broadly, if we could, about the role that you're in and the role of the state versus the role of the federal government. And I was thinking about this because there's been a number of issues that you've taken on where there's a federal rule in one place or federal oversight in one place, but then there's also the issue of the state and who effectively should have that oversight. And one of the interesting cases that's been brought literally in the past couple of weeks is this case with Amazon over workplace safety. Amazon preemptively sued you, as you very well know, arguing that the federal government oversees or should be overseeing workplace safety. You've sued Amazon, making the argument that because this happened in New York State, that you should oversee and be able to prosecute based on this. How do you think about those two issues right now?
So first, let me talk about Amazon. Amazon is wrong. And they engaged in a preemptive strike because they became aware of our investigation, which began in March of 2020. And as a result of unsafe conditions, as a result of a workplace which put workers' lives and safety in harm's way, as a result of their failure to address conditions that were brought to their attention in the midst of the pandemic. And then when workers took action when they brought these complaints to the attention of managers, there were two individuals in particular who were fired. They were terminated. And we believe that that was in violation of the law, these retaliatory actions. And two, we believe that workplaces should be safe from this pandemic, and that Amazon should take into consideration the health and safety of its employees, and they did not. And so what they decided to do is engage in a preemptive strike, and we in turn filed our action. Now, getting back to your original question, the last 2 years that I've been Attorney General, and given the former President of the United States, I found myself defending states' rights, believe it or not, a woman of color defending states' rights. But what individuals understand and their knowledge of states' rights is sort of different from what we can recall during the civil rights period. I was defending the right of New York State against an administration which basically was enacting regressive policies which hurt New Yorkers. They include issues such as denying New Yorkers the right to participate in the Trusted Traveler Program, attempts to deny undocumented immigrants in a rich immigrant state such as New York from participating in the census, when the Constitution of the United States speaks to the fact that everyone should be counted regardless of their immigration status. The Postal Service, during a time when we were in the midst of an election, this administration, the former administration, wanted to basically change the operations of the postal system. It includes, but is not limited to ICE, basically engaging in actions in courthouses where they were basically arresting immigrants for basically nonviolent offenses. And so this had an impact on the administration of justice in our courthouses. It includes, but is not limited to, reproductive rights, where individuals basically wanted to deny women access to reproductive services. It includes our environment. Again, the air that we breathe, the water that we drink, and clean energy. All of these things and more, I had to lead. I had to protect, again, the residents of the state of New York. And I joined with other like-minded attorney generals around this country, protecting the states' rights of not only New York, but other similarly situated states. And I would say Democratic attorney generals defended our democracy. We were the backbone of this country, and we won over 85% of our cases. And I'm proud of that scorecard.
Let me ask you a separate question. It relates directly to Amazon. I had interviewed Chris Smalls, who was one of the employees who was fired, and then later it appeared through emails and other things that the company really tried to publicly discredit him. I'm curious more broadly how you think about the relationship in this state in particular between employers and labor right now.
So, I believe in the right to organize. I support labor. I recognize the reason why we've got a strong middle class is because of the labor movement. I recognize all that they have done in this country. I recognize their right to organize and will protect their right to organize. That being said, the case against Amazon has more to do with the fact that they failed to provide a safe working environment for their employees in the midst of a pandemic. And when complaints were brought to them, unfortunately, they engaged in retaliation against Chris Smalls and other employees, and that is unconscionable.
When you bring a case, how do you think about the balance between justice on one side, and sometimes these are not, these can be in conflict, justice on one side and social good in some ways on another? And the reason I mention this is you'll see some critics of the case that you brought against Amazon say, well, you're going to run Amazon out of town. And if you were to run them out of town, that's going to be bad for New York.
It's not my objective to run Amazon out of town. It's my objective to protect the safety and the health of its employees. That really is my objective. And right now, this day, Amazon could approach my office. We can engage in a consent decree where they rehire these employees and they put forth efforts to protect the health and the safety of their employees, and we will call it a day.
Right. Okay, another philosophical question for you that I've talked to a lot of prosecutors over the years about this, which is you have an enormous power both to bring a case and frankly not bring a case in certain instances. How do you think about it? And the reason I ask is I know some prosecutors who say, look, I only want to bring a case, not only if it's meritorious, but if I believe that I can win. And everybody's got a different threshold. Some people say it's 80%, 90%. I only want to bring it if I'm going to win. There are other people who say I'm going to bring it whether I win or lose, as long as I think it's meritorious. How do you think about that? Because there are people who say that this can be a deterrent on one side. Other people think if you lose, that's almost an anti-deterrent. Take us through your thinking about this.
So in terms of winning and losing, usually that comes down to criminal prosecutors. And for the most part, the Office of Attorney General is civil in nature. We have a limited criminal jurisdiction. I am guided by one simple concept, and that's the concept of justice. That's my North Star. And standing up for the rights of individuals, particularly when big business or powerful interests trample on those rights. In addition to that, I tend to test the law, and I tend to bring novel cases and novel theories, because it's really critically important that over the years, our Constitution, as you know, is a living document, and it has been bended. And so I continue to press the law, particularly given the changing environment that we find ourselves in. For instance, in the area of antitrust, when people think of antitrust, they think of Ma Bell, they think of Microsoft. We're in an entirely different economy, a tech economy. And so it's primarily important that we focus on protecting privacy interests, protecting our data, and ensuring that big tech companies do not operate as a monopoly and that they do not engage in these predatory practices.
So let's talk about antitrust, because it's an issue near and dear to my heart. I think you know this, but my father was a former antitrust litigator, so I grew up around the dinner table talking about how to define markets and the like.
So you're sympathetic to our litigation.
I'm objective about the litigation. Let me ask you though this, because one of the things I've always thought about is the balance between trying to get the competitive piece right and also the innovation piece right. And how you think, again, as a state in one instance versus, obviously the Department of Justice has its own antitrust division and is thinking a lot about these issues, but especially when it comes to technology, how you think about it. Because I look at a Facebook and clearly they have a huge, arguably monopoly power in certain cases. But at the same time, I look and I say to myself, if you and I had said the phrase TikTok 2 years ago, we would have looked at our watches. And what does that say about how you can regulate, or through policy, or through bringing cases like this, competition effectively?
But it goes back to your prior question. And that is, the federal government under the previous administration was absent in a lot of areas, and particularly in the area of antitrust. And so when you talk about TikTok, TikTok needs to thrive. And what has happened is that Facebook has engaged in these predatory acquisitions. They have not been successful as it relates to TikTok, but and perhaps it's because they don't consider TikTok a rival, or perhaps it's because their attempts to acquire TikTok have failed. The point is that these big tech companies stifle competition, innovation, creativity. They're a threat to our privacy by, again, monetizing our data, all of these things and more. And that is why it is really critically important that I and other attorney generals in this nation decided to take action against big tech. Antitrust, it's been a long time since we've seen any antitrust action come out of attorney generals' offices, but that is changing. And I think, again, consumers are happy. And a number of consumers think, well, they say to me, Tish, what's the harm? It's free. Well, it's not free. By monetizing your data, it's not free. By all the time that you spent looking at Facebook and Google, it's not free. And so it comes at a cost. And small businesses are being hurt. The fact that you are only seeing certain advertising comes at a cost. And so for all of these reasons, one, my office decided to lead the litigation on Facebook. Colorado is leading, Phil Weiser, Attorney General Phil Weiser is leading on Google. Texas is looking at a case, as well as New Mexico.
When you think, though, about a breakup, what does that look like to you? Because oftentimes these social networks rely in large part on the social network, right? It is the scale that makes a social network a success. Is this more about breaking up the Instagrams from the Facebook piece, from the WhatsApp piece, or something else?
That is part of our relief. But part of our relief, our basic relief is stopping this anti-competitive behavior. But breaking it up is one of the injunctive terms that we are looking at.
So you've gone after big tech. One of the things that I was curious about, because I remember this comment very well, I was thinking about Wall Street. And you very famously said that it was critically important that you were not known as the sheriff on Wall Street. And I wanted to ask you why.
Because that belonged to my former boss, Elliot Spitzer. And I know it caused a big brouhaha. But the reality is that we're arguing over a nomenclature. And, that was his title. I wanted my own title. And so I just want to be known by someone who stood up to big interest, big pocketed corporations, and was not afraid of a fight, whether it be on Wall Street, whether it be in Washington, D.C., and whether it be, for instance, a case that we brought to today against LibreNexus that was exploiting immigrants, or consumers, these bottom feeders, as I call them, that are preying upon vulnerable populations like seniors who are basically marketing these false cures for COVID. We just need to stand up, and the Attorney General of the state of New York has a lot of power, and we want to flex that power, and we want to stand up and serve as the people's lawyer. And that's what I'm doing each and every day. And I'm thankful and I'm honored to do that.
How do you think about another piece of technology these days that's both crosses the technological world and the finance world, and that is cryptocurrency? We were talking to the Treasury Secretary this morning about Bitcoin, and one of the things that she's worried about is it being used for illicit purposes. I know that you brought a cryptocurrency case, but I'm curious how you're thinking about cryptocurrency more broadly. Or how concerned are you that it's being used for fraud? And do you think that long term it's something that's here to stay, and this is part of a growing pains of an innovative new tool, or do you think that this is something that we're going to not be talking about in the future?
So it's interesting, it's a balancing act between innovation and protecting investors against fraud. And I don't want to stifle innovation, but at the same time, I recognize that most Bitcoins are not backed by anything. Most Bitcoins, unfortunately, have been engaged in some unlawful behavior. And the shares of the Bitcoin and other types of stock have, been inflated, and then a few minutes later, unfortunately, there's been swings in the market. And so I think it's important, and I've advised my staff to put out an advisory, one to institutional players and to individuals on the marketplace about the inherent risks associated with cryptocurrency.
And so what do you think the outcome of that will be? Meaning if we're having this conveation together,
I wish I had a crystal ball, but I don't have a crystal ball. All I know is that buyers beware.
Okay. I wanted to talk about lessons you've learned in this role over the years. You've won a lot of cases, but you've also lost a couple along the way, including one against Exxon. I know it was not a case that you initiated yourself, but I was curious what the big lesson of that case, for example, was in terms of how you bring other cases or how you mount a case.
Well, cryptocurrency, Exxon, as you indicated, was initiated by my predecessor, Eric Schneiderman. And we took on that case. And unfortunately, we were not successful at that case. But that is an example, again, of testing the law and focusing on an area, investor protection, as opposed to what I would have liked to have seen in that litigation was more consumer fraud. As you know, other attorneys general, including my friend Maura Healey from Mass, is focusing and it has initiated a case against Exxon in the consumer space. And that was unfortunately not our focus. But nonetheless, I'm proud of the litigation. I'm proud of the work that the team engaged in. I'm proud that they tested the waters, and I'm proud that they initiated advanced a novel theory and attempted to advance the law. But I know at the end of the day, someone ultimately will be successful as it relates to Exxon.
What do you tell people who think that these roles are political roles, that these aren't legal roles because they are an elected position, and because folks in your role have often gone on to higher roles?
So, it's funny that you say that, because when I was the public advocate, I tested the law a lot. I wanted to test the standing of the office of public advocate. I was successful in some cases, and in others I was not. Now, as the Attorney General of the state of New York, rarely is the issue of my jurisdiction tested. I've been a litigator for some time, a former public defense attorney, a former assistant attorney general, and I love the law. The law is both a sword and a shield, and the law can be used to advance the interest of the general public and protect those who are marginalized and vulnerable. And so I don't really view this as a political job. I view this through the lens of justice and correcting wrongs and standing up for those without a champion, and using my voice and my platform to seek justice for them. I view myself as the people's lawyer. And I do know that there are others who say that Attorney General stands for aspiring governor. That is, at this point in time, my focus, again, is representing the interests of the citizens of the great state of New York. And I would argue that my team should have a gold star attached to its label, because we have been putting our heads down, not focusing on the politics, but focusing on the law and standing up for the interest of New Yorkers. And it's an honor and a privilege to be associated with all of the wonderful professionals in our office.
I have two more questions, and I know we're going to run out of time soon. But you brought a case against the NYPD in terms of how they acted during the protests over the summer. And again, I wanted to ask you about the balance in terms of how you think about the net effect on society. And I know you talk about representing the people. And the reason I ask this is because there seems to be two things that hopefully are not in conflict, but are oftentimes framed that way, which was, how do you reform the police on one side, and how do you have effectively more law and order or more safety on the other? And how do you think about those two ideas?
Because if you look at the Constitution, and if you look at the First Amendment and the 14th Amendment, and if you look at my responsibilities, and that is to defend the Constitution. And when you witness, as a result of videos and as a result of talking to individuals, when you witness their rights being violated, then you've got to do something about it. And so it's unfortunate that NYPD, when it comes to large scale protests, has been violating the rights of individuals in a systematic fashion. And it dates back to the Republican convention. It dates back to the controversy on Wall Street. And it dates back most recently into this racial reckoning that we find ourselves in, where individuals basically protested in the aftermath of George Floyd's death, and they were petitioning their government for reform and for change. And during that period, their rights were violated. And it was evidenced by a hearing that I conducted, a 3-day hearing where I heard from over 100 individuals who participated in their protest. It was witnessed by the individuals who also submitted testimony. And it was witnessed by the the cameras, the videos, the pictures, all of that evidence that we analyzed. And it was also analyzed when in comparison to the testimony of the police commissioner. And his testimony stood in stark contrast to that of the protesters. And as a result of that, it was important that we attempt to engage in some systematic reform of NYPD as it relates to these large-scale protests. And let me also say that even the police commissioner, as well as Deputy Inspector Moynihan, indicated that the vast majority of individuals who engaged in protests were peaceful, and it's those individuals that I am standing up for. And I'm standing up, more importantly, for the Constitution. And I will defend their right to protest. I will defend their First Amendment right. And I will defend their 14th Amendment right. Kettling was wrong when you contain individuals and you do not allow them to exit, using batons, using cars, arresting essential workers, arresting legal observers. All of that and more was wrong. And so it's important that we engage in reforms. And our report and our complaint was confirmed by a report that was conducted by the Department of Investigation and the city's own corporation counsel. They agree with us. They agree with our findings. The disagreement is over whether or not NYPD should agree to a monitor. And that's what we are, that's part of our injunctive relief that we are seeking. And that is the appointment of a monitor to ensure that the practices and procedures, that there are practices and procedures in place in response to large scale protests, and that the rights of individuals are respected and protected.
Fair enough. Final question for you.
Yes.
You did an interview in Cosmo magazine. I'm not normally a Cosmo reader, but I've become one. And you said something that fascinated me. You said, "I have this armor that I wear each and every day, and it cannot be pierced." What did you mean by that?
Well, I'm a woman of faith, and my faith teaches me about being protected. And so what it meant metaphorically is I have an armor. I carry it each and every day. I am blessed to be protected, and that any arrows that come my way, I can repel them because I stand up for Lady Justice.
Letitia James, thank you for the conversation. Really appreciate it. This was terrific. Thank you. And thank you all for joining us. We will be back in just a little bit with the CEO of Delta Airlines, Ed Bastian. Steve Ballmer will be coming up a little bit later, and then we've got a huge day ahead as well tomorrow. See you in just a moment.